You were born in 1990, which means you turned 10 in the year 2000. You turned 20 in 2010. You turned 30 in 2020. Read that again slowly. Every decade of your life has ended at the exact turn of a decade. Your 10th birthday was the millennium. Your 20th was the year smartphones became the center of everything. Your 30th was the year the world closed. You were the only birth year alive that hit 3 consecutive decade birthdays at 3 consecutive decade turns. And every single one of those turns brought something that restructured the world you were standing in the middle of. But before any of that, before the millennium fear and the towers and the recession and the pandemic, there was your childhood. And your childhood was the 90s. All of it. Clean. You were 4 years old when The Lion King came out. 6 when Space Jam was in theaters. 8 when you first heard about something called Google and didn't understand what it was. You had a Tamagotchi you kept alive under your desk. Pokemon cards in a binder, sorted by type, protected like currency. Saturday morning cartoons you set an alarm for. A Game Boy with 4 AA batteries that lasted exactly long enough. You were 9 years old in 1999, the last year of the last decade of the 20th century. You didn't know that's what it was. You were just a kid watching the countdown. And then you turned 10, and the decade turned with you. And from that point forward, something significant happened to your life at every milestone birthday you ever had. Psychology has a name for what that does to a person. And once you understand it, the specific way you move through the world will finally make sense. At age 10, the world held its breath for Y2K. You were old enough to absorb the collective anxiety without fully understanding it. You felt the weight of it without the vocabulary for it. And then the clock turned, and nothing catastrophic happened, but something subtler did. The future became a variable in a way it hadn't been before. At age 11, September 11th happened. The first week of 6th grade for most people born in 1990. The precise beginning of adolescence, the developmental stage where a person's fundamental model of how the world works is being constructed for the first time. 9/11 didn't just happen to you. It became the foundation your entire adolescent worldview was built on. Every sense of safety, every concept of stability, every assumption about the future was assembled after that morning. At age 18, the financial system collapsed. You graduated high school in 2008 into the worst economic environment in 80 years. Your first year of college, your first year of working, the first time you tried to build anything in the adult world, and the ground gave way underneath it before you'd finished laying the foundation. At age 30, in the year you were supposed to have arrived, COVID arrived instead. 4 transition points, 4 disruptions, all perfectly, precisely timed. Developmental psychologists study what they call life stage synchrony, the principle that historical events do not land on all people equally. Their psychological impact is determined in large part by what stage of development the person occupies when the event occurs. A disruption that hits a child registers differently than one that hits an adolescent. A disruption at 18 does different work than one at 35. And the research is consistent. Events that coincide with developmental transition points, the passages between childhood and adolescence, adolescence and adulthood, early adulthood and its next stage, leave the deepest and most lasting structural marks. Because those are the moments when the brain is most actively building its model of what the world is, how it works, and what a person should expect from it. The 1990 birth year hit a developmental transition point at 10 years old, at 11, at 18, at 30. Not approximately, precisely. Each disruption arrived at the exact moment the developmental architecture was most open to being restructured by it. That is not random bad luck. It is a specific generational profile, and it produced a specific kind of psychology. In 2012, psychiatrist and developmental researcher Michael Rudder published a comprehensive paper in Development and Psychopathology titled Resilience as a Dynamic Concept, a synthesis of decades of research on how people absorb and recover from adversity across the lifespan. Rudder's central finding challenged the most common assumption about adversity. Most people treat hardship as purely subtractive, something that takes from a person and leaves less behind. The research showed something more specific. Adversity that is survived at developmental transition points does not only create damage, it also creates something that cannot be built any other way. The term Rudder uses is stealing effect, the documented phenomenon where manageable adversity encountered at key developmental stages builds capacities for resilience, regulation, and adaptation that remain elevated throughout life. Not as a consolation prize, as a measurable biological outcome of having navigated difficulty at a time when the nervous system was still forming its baseline responses. The 1990 cohort encountered significant adversity at ages 10, 11, 18, and 30, four of the most developmentally significant thresholds a human life contains. And Rudder's research suggests that each survival, each recalibration, each rebuilding in the aftermath of disruption deposited something that didn't leave when the circumstances changed. You were not hardened by what happened to you. You were built differently by it. That is not the same thing. Here is what being born in 1990 actually built. You have been tested at every major threshold of your life, not in the abstract, not in ways you could opt out of, but concretely, at 11, at 18, at 30. By events large enough that the entire world around you was also trying to figure out what had just happened, and you rebuilt, every time. From a different starting point than you expected, with different tools than you planned for, in a world that looked different from the one you had been building toward. What that kind of repeated recalibration produces is something that cannot be manufactured by a stable life, a very specific relationship to uncertainty, not comfort with it, nobody is comfortable with it, but a proven knowledge that uncertainty is survivable, that the version of the future you planned can be replaced by a version you didn't plan, that the ground can go and you can still find your footing. You also carry something that most people around you are still working to develop. You know, from the inside, that the thing you were most afraid of at each stage of your life turned out to be the thing that built the most consequential parts of who you are. The recession at 18 that closed the door on the career you had planned. The 30th birthday in a lockdown apartment instead of wherever you'd imagined it would be. Those weren't just disruptions you survived. They were the conditions under which the most durable version of you got built. There is something worth sitting with about the specific life you were handed by being born in 1990. You were given the last clean decade of a certain kind of childhood. The 90s in full, every Saturday morning, every summer, every year of it before the world became something more complicated. You had the complete version of that specific era. It was yours. And then, precisely as you stepped from each stage of life into the next, the world offered you something harder to hold. The millennium fear at the end of childhood, the towers at the beginning of adolescence, the recession at the beginning of adulthood, the pandemic at the beginning of your 30s. People born a year earlier were 12 on September 11th. Already inside adolescence when it happened. People born a year later were 17 in 2008, still in high school when the recession hit. The timing of your birth placed you at the exact entry point of each new developmental stage at the exact moment history shifted. That is the specific life of someone born in 1990. Not easier than others, not harder for the sake of it, just precisely, repeatedly, almost deliberately timed to require the most from you at every threshold. What that produced in you is not a list of things you survived. It is the person you are because of when you arrived, what was waiting at every door, and the fact that you kept walking through anyway, every single time. If this described your specific year in a way nothing else has, subscribe. The next video goes somewhere everyone born around your year is going to recognize immediately. And after this one, you already know you want to see it.